Welcome to the only daily podcast focusing on compliance news of the day. Each morning, start your day with a cup of coffee and Tom Fox, the voice of compliance, to hear about 4 of the top compliance, corruption, or leadership stories you will need to start your day. The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.
The Daily Compliance News for August 19, 2021, the Productivity Boom Edition. And we begin with that story from the Washington Post, which reports that the U.S. economy could be on the verge of a productivity boom and indeed an entire game changer for the economy, largely as one of the effects of COVID-19, as companies are experiencing a surge in productivity from the work from home, but additional tech solutions that we all had to engage in over the past 18 months. This is really promising for the economic recovery. Worker productivity grew 4.3% in Q1 at the highest rates in years. And although the second quarter slowed, it's nearly doubled what was experienced under the prior administration. So great news on that front. But the question I have for you, Mr. Compliance Officer, is what does this mean for compliance? If we're having greater productivity, does that mean greater efficiency? Does that mean greater speed? So what does it mean from the compliance perspective if we're on the verge of a productivity boom? Next up, from Dylan Tokar over at the Wall Street Journal Risk and Compliance Journal, he reports on the oral arguments in the Second Circuit appeal of the Lawrence Hoskins verdict. This is an FCPA case where Hoskins was found guilty at trial of violating the FCPA. The trial court overturned the verdict, but upheld a money laundering verdict. Both sides appealed to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. Dylan was really at the top of his game here. This is one of the best histories of the Hoskins case I've read. So if you're interested in this case and the really interesting legal questions it presents, I would urge you to take a look at Dylan Tokar's article on the bribery, or rather the Hoskins case. It's a fascinating legal issue and many important implications for the compliance professional going forward. Next up, our friends over at social media have allowed over 100 new official or pro-Taliban accounts to be posted on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, despite a ban on the group by these sites on the group. The Taliban obviously was well known for what they did the last time they were in power, and if they're going to continue their revolutionary attacks against the West, you have to wonder why the social media platforms are allowing them to proselytize in spite of this ban. It also speaks really to the social media sophistication of the Taliban, and are they going to be viewed as a legitimate government going forward? So interesting questions posed against Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And finally, cycling back to another article from the Risk and Compliance Journal and the Wall Street Journal, Mingy Sun has an interview with Freddie Mac's new compliance officer, Jerry Mauricio, who has become the senior VP and chief compliance officer last month. An interesting interview that tells you a little bit more about his background and the risks that he sees at Freddie Mac and how he hopes to move forward. So another great article from our friends at the Risk and Compliance Journal at the Wall Street Journal. If you don't check that out every day, I would suggest you get on their mailing list because they always have great stuff on that site.
The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network and a proud member of C-Suite Radio. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you'll join me again tomorrow.